Hi there and welcome. You may wish to watch my intro as it gives a few details that may help the watching and listening to this video a little more palatable, although this is not a prerequisite for watching this video first. Thank you. Trauma clearing and healing through listening meditation leading to awakening. 7 questions I'm asking myself. Will listening meditation resolve my trauma? What about repeating unresolved thoughts? How simple is listening meditation? What do I need to do to prepare? How will listening meditation affect my life? Does my age affect healing? What does it cost? Life is a divine meditation. Love is one's natural state of being. Enlightenment is one's state of mind before thinking. Life is free. This is an introduction into the simplicity of awareness, being one's life meditation, and how to clear any trauma one may have experienced or is experiencing in one's life. Generally speaking, the first trauma experienced is being born into one's world with a smack on the backside. Whilst there may be many medical justifications put forward as to why pain is inflicted on a newborn, this prompts the question, why would a parent abuse or allow abusing of their child as the first act of welcoming their beloved? The mind control method of pain and pleasure, reward and punishment is now in place. As the parent picks up their child and whispers sweet melodies into the newborn's ears. Apart from the newborn screaming at the top of his or her lungs, excused as getting air into the lungs of the baby so as to get the heart moving, etc. The newborn has had its first lesson in psychological, emotional manipulation of the mind. A sense of unresolved judgment is established. Breathing has been instilled as a means the mind will use to justify its existence of survival, and now the newborn's world is dependent on what the world out there will provide for it. As time goes by, the child forgets its safety and security in its innate sense of being, as the programming of society gets ingrained as its truth. The trauma one calls one's life experience, be that good or bad, the character I call me, myself, my persona, the mask one wears to navigate one's sense of reality, has nothing to do with you. Life, the I of being that is being oneself. Simply put, the trauma is the experience one has taken as being one's own, and through an ingrained sense of belief, one believes it to be real. Whilst the real of oneself, the purity, the love of oneself, the me with all the power endowed by life itself, seems to stay buried beneath a false persona in a world of mysticism. Living life from a sense of me, mine, and my personal sense of self is a state of trauma, a never-ending sense of survival, until one either wakes up from the sense of me or passes out of the play of humanhood. Experiencing a sense of me, my personal self, and then having one's truth revealed is like once all one knew was cheap wine, until one experienced the finest wine in the world. One would never go back to the cheap wine. Listening may at first seem a practice that seems to become a new normal, but in actual fact has always been one's normal. One just never seemed to hear clearly. One's new normal, which in truth is not new, that has always been present, has seemed to be masked by a reacting to senses thinking mechanism. One has called one's personal sense of me. Life is a meditation when one is not thinking about it. One is being. Listening. Just listening to the audible live stream sound running through one's head, and during the listening, life goes on, with one still doing all one needs to do for oneself and others too. But the doing is not personal. There is a sense that doing is being done. Just by listening to the audible live stream playing in one's head. The secret is how to bring oneself to this point, this state of being. This is what this discourse is all about. Transcendental meditation, sometimes mistaken as a trance state, is a form of meditation that transcends, seems to send one's awareness to a point other than where it seemed to originate, the assumed normal state of being. Going beyond the thinking mind, or more accurately put, preceding the thinking mind, puts one at an advantage of being in a state of pure clarity, many refer to as enlightenment. Once one has grasped the simplicity of this technique, it can be utilized anytime, anywhere, without hesitation. Repeating unresolved thought patterns, those thoughts that seem to repeat themselves in all different guises with the intention of looking at the same old problem from a different way, are just the mind rehashing and rehearsing something that the mind thinks are a means to a resolution of the problem, but in fact keep one away from the sense of solution, acting as a smokescreen from the clarity that underlies one's innate sense of being. I open the fridge door and I'm looking for the camembert cheese that I was given as a present from a purely sourced organic farm, where the cattle are free to live their lives in love and harmony. I'm still looking around the fridge for the cheese 5 minutes later. In frustration of knowing I have this wonderful cheese in the fridge, I shut the fridge door in disgust and walk away. Where in God's name is that cheese? I know I have it, I've seen it. Or what the hell? I settle for second best. Processed cheese spread out of a jar bought from Sparks and Mensa. I've now eaten and I'm sitting quietly listening, not thinking where the camembert cheese went to, just listening to the silence quietly. Then out of nowhere I recall where the camembert cheese that I was given as a present is. I get up and look in the fridge. There it is. The cheese had gone nowhere. It's in the fridge right in front of me on the top shelf. It seems that when my mind is quiet, still, I can see clearly. Is not the above typical of many that seem to search for the truth of oneself, never quite seeing that which is hidden in plain sight, in one's ongoing 24/7 365 awareness? But only as one's mind seems to be still and listen, does one see clearly. In truth, the transcendental state is one's normal state of being, and thinking is an altered state of being, of not knowing. Thinking one needs to know by accumulative information learned through a searching, seeking life journey. By listening, just listening, to the silence within, one may find oneself in this transcendental state, where thinking may still seem to be going on in the background, but listening is forefront in one's awareness. Now, one is not subject to the thinking mind being the master. It is not having one chasing all over the place. The still mind of clarity is now directing any thinking needed in any given moment. This can be likened to getting up there above the clouds where the streets are not crowded, where all mental thinking activity has ceased and all that is present is oneself. Spiritual enlightenment is being the ocean inclusive of the wave, that is, the ocean being I, living through an emotional experience, but not bound by the experience. It's not just a knowing, it is being, living one's life here, now. One already is enlightened, one just thinks one is not. And it is the thinking one is not enlightened that is the seeming problem. But this is not about right thinking as opposed to wrong thinking. Thinking is the antithesis to enlightenment, clarity. The thinking mind is the producer of all one's problems in one's life. Or more precisely, is the problem. One may argue, where will I be without thinking? The answer is, at peace. One's intelligence and ability is not dependent on thinking, as all thinking takes place after the initial thought. And as one ends up thinking about the initial thought, one can seem to run into all sorts of issues regarding why, when, where and if. So essentially one would find that acting on the initial thought would not require thinking at all, if one's mind is quiescent still. The practice is to bring one's mind to a point as simplistically as possible, where the thinking mind that seems to produce many, if not most, of the issues in one's life, does not affect one's life. One already is, one just thinks one is not. So is being the problem, or is thinking that one is not being, that is the problem. I will show how simple it is to be, with no concern or thinking about the appearance of what is not. Through the ages, the approach to enlightenment has been cloaked in mysticism, where clearing and healing trauma has always been. One has to attain something to become enlightened. This is factually wrong. Many have gone on this search, have spent their entire lifetime in search of an elusive butterfly that has essentially been within oneself all of one's life, just not in the place where one has been looking. One cannot get something one already has. The getting is a denial. So straight away one is off on a wild goose chase that takes one looking everywhere except where one should be looking, within. And it is really not that difficult. In fact, it is so easy. It can be seen as a great shock as one discovers the simplicity and ease of what and where enlightenment is. Self-awareness is awareness of self, the I of self. One cannot be unaware of oneself, or one would cease to be, and that is an impossibility. It is what sense of self one is being aware of that is the real question. If one is paying attention to one's thinking process, one is not paying attention to oneself. One is paying attention to an altered state of consciousness, an afterthought, a thinking mechanism, not the initial thought that has arisen in one's sense of conscious awareness. It is then seen that this is not the personal I one calls oneself by the name of Joe or Jack, the self that was born and grew through a conditioned mindset that seems to be running the show. It is the I that precludes any personal sense of I. It is here that one finds peace, a peace that precludes any sense of problem, a stillness where one looks at one's world from a peaceful perspective, whilst facing the turmoil one's world seems to present to oneself. From this vantage point, one is able to know a confidence without explanation, a sense of sovereignty where one can stand regardless of what the appearance seems to throw at oneself. If one is looking for an answer to the problems in one's life, the trauma that one has encountered, and there can seem to be many of all sorts, some personally related, some work related, or combinations, I have found it best not to try to deal with the problem head on from the level of the problem, but to see there is no problem. At first, this approach may sound a little convoluted, but when one understands, which is essentially standing under the simplicity of this approach, one will learn to turn to this method as it becomes first nature. In fact, it is one's first nature. In this present day and age, society has grown to a point that to many it may seem overwhelming, as it seems that when once an individual seemed in control of one's life, nowadays it seems that there is a control mechanism laid out by the controllers of society. It seems to find an answer to all of one's needs, and all one need do is go online and do a search for one's problem, only to find that one is now pigeonholed into a group or subgroup, and now one's mind is chasing as much information as possible to come to terms with one's own pigeonhole. Essentially, one's mind has been conditioned into believing that the sensory feedback from the body is one's own, and the only course of action is to react to this reaction of this sensory feedback, therefore creating a sense of me having an experience in a world of sensory input and output. The mind likes this occupation of searching for an answer, only to uncover another problem that needs to be answered, and then when this problem is answered, another problem presents itself out of the answer, and on and on. Every problem has its root in one's approach to life. Everyone is essentially in their own individual boat, sailing the same ocean of life, all looking at different waves that the individual will relate to. Some will relate to the same waves as their problem. Some will relate to a different wave as their problem. But essentially, for the most part, all that is seen is the waves of the ocean, not the ocean itself. Is the wave separate from the ocean, or is it just the appearance one has become accustomed to by the rules laid out by society? That the ocean is the playground of. If one were to look at the waves and see their nature is to rise out of the ocean, grow, and then crash back into the ocean, is this unlike one's problems that seem never ending as part of the course of life? But the only distinction between wave and an ocean is its appearance. Wave is ocean and ocean is wave. So why deal with the wave, the problem, And why not go to the root of the wave, which is the ocean? There is far less turbulence below the surface of the ocean where the waves are rising and crashing above. So much so that the fish in the water seem more at home under the waves. I wonder if fish have any problems. This analogy that I've just stated is akin to one's personal mind that seems to be faced with many problems on a daily basis. So how does one become a fish in the ocean and leave the waves to do their thing of rising and crashing? How does one become less and less affected by the waves? There are many different pigeonholes to sit in. Some are mental holes, some physical holes, or if one chooses, mental physical holes. There really is no distinction as to what one is born with and seems to carry around all of one's life, as an outpicturing of how one karmically sees one's world. As stated at the beginning of this article, one cannot deal with a problem on the level of a problem. One has to get back to where there is no problem. One avoids change until the old trusted way becomes unbearable to carry on with. The body has no inherent life of its own. Its life is the embodiment of life derived from life itself. This embodiment of life appears to work as its own entity, but its only sense of separation seems caused by the sensory body giving feedback that its physicality is not attached to anything. The mind interprets this as being separate from its source. Therefore, a sense of fear fills in the blanks, and one seems to run with this notion eternally until this is pointed out. Life includes the embodiment of itself, as does the ocean include the wave. But the wave cannot be separate in any way from the ocean. The embodiment of life cannot be separate from life, love being itself. The human mind is like a wheel spinning out of control. The question is, how does one get off the wheel? Actually, one does not get off the wheel, as one finds that one's life is to experience the wheel, but know that one is not the wheel. The trick is to slow the wheel down, like putting on a brake. There is a part of the wheel that never moves, the spindle. Though the spindle is part of the wheel, it is not subject to the spinning of the wheel. It is the point of the spindle that one's attention is now focused on, the still point of one's awareness. The wheel may still seem to be spinning, but the still point is not affected by the spinning. As a consequence of resting in the still point of one's awareness, the wheel, one's mind, that was once spinning out of control, now seems to appear to slow down. Now one is more able to articulate one's world in a more restful manner, even as the world out there may still seem to appear to be spinning out of control. In the silence of this still point is where self-healing takes place. Oneself, the I that one calls oneself by name, is the one that wants healing. Through indoctrination, people have been taught that if one is injured in any manner whatsoever, one is to seek assistance from another that is qualified in the field of one's injury. The truth is, the very I that one comes to recognize as the I of oneself is the I self, the one that is the healer. Without consent, one can never be healed on any level. be that out there through a practitioner or otherwise. Consent has become the norm. That change can only come from the without, out there. But true power comes from within, the very eye of oneself, and as the consent turns inward, so one finds consent being given to oneself, to heal oneself, and really is not so much a healing that takes place, although that may appear to be part of the case. It is truly a revealing of the power one innately is. Here is a short list of traumas and problems, and at the end of the list is a solution. Emotional trauma, emotional guilt, emotional debt, guilt, environmentalism, saving the planet, or just plain saving, abortion, depression, anxiety, rape, being alive whilst suicidal, isolation, enlightenment, narcissism, victimhood, anger, grief, money or lack of, partners, life direction, shall I, shan't I, what if, when, doubt, who do I trust, why is life so hard, what about my depression, do I suffer, why do I suffer, do I have to put up with suffering, etc., etc. The list is long as the amount of waves one could count on an ocean. Suffice it to say, by leaving any problem out is in no way to demean any particular problem. All problems are in direct proportion to what one is able to deal with, on a soul karmic level. Essentially, one never gets more than one has signed up for. Is there a problem present, or is it the way one is seeing a problem? Is the seeing through a sense of fear? Clear seeing always is a better dream. Trauma, any trauma, is always to bring oneself to a point of surrender, not to where the trauma is seemingly being inflicted from. Although without the infliction, one's conditioned sense of me would not be brought to a place of surrender. The surrender is to oneself, the love that lives one's life, the wonder and the beauty of one's very being. Or one can find a band-aid to hide behind. The choice is always the individual's, and the individual's alone. Solution. The solution is to bring one's mind to a still point where there is no problem, as the only time one seems to have a problem is when one is thinking about it. But will the problem still be here when my mind seems to become active again? Thinking can seem to lead oneself into a fearful state. Consequently, if the food of the problem is fear, one must starve the problem of its food by stilling the mind, and with more regularity, the longer one stills the mind, the less food the thinking mind has to feed itself. Here's the thing. We've all got a story to tell. One's history or her story, some good, some bad, and some a mixture of both good and bad. Is a story with pain and is a story one seems to know, but knows in truth the story is not happening to oneself. This is healing at its finest. Please bear in mind one thing. If one chooses to sign up for a healing session to receive healing, I will not be doing the healing. I am only a facilitator. At best, I will draw out of oneself what one needs to know. I will only be present. The one receiving the healing is the one that produces it and generates the healing. I will just show the way. It is up to the individual in how one is to utilize the healing, but one thing will be for sure. one will notice at some point profound changes in one's life, where one will be asking oneself, where did all my problems go? In subsequent videos and audios, I show the mechanism and process of how these sensory inputs and as a consequence the outputs, through reacting to the initial reaction, are seen and understood, and further how one creates a distance, leaving one the observer as opposed to the one suffering the problem the picture is presenting. All problems are essentially the same, just appearing differently to the individual. So the process of dismantling the appearance of the individual's problem may differ vastly, so there are no set rules as to how one should compare with another. The healing is open for everyone. Each person has this within themselves. All they need do is ask and be willing to walk the road. This is where life trauma leads oneself. The choice is always the individual's. I do hope this video has been helpful to answer certain questions that one may have been contemplating. As I've mentioned previously, there are further videos and writings to look through that may answer any further questions that may arise. Feel free to drop a line or two through my email address for further information. Thank you. Love, Cosmic.